Howdy folks, I hope you've all had a good weekend, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. My apologies for no Mingles with Jingles last week, but I really wasn't feeling particularly good. And I have to admit, I'm suffering from a serious case of cabin fever here. I sat down and tried to figure out when was the last time I went out that wasn't going shopping. And I haven't even been out to do any shopping in about 2 months. Certainly haven't done it at all this year. Just getting everything delivered. And I think, unless I'm very much mistaken, that since March last year, so nearly a year, with the exception of going out maybe once every 2 weeks to do some shopping, I've left this house twice. Shortly after the first lockdown in the UK ended, myself and Rita went out to get something to eat and just to get out of the house. And I can't actually remember what the other occasion was. You'd think that, it would be unforgettable. I mean, there's only the second time that I've left the house in a year to do anything other than to go to the shops once every 2 weeks. But no, I can't even remember what it was. Oh, I'm going crazy here. And I've been thinking a bit over the course of the last week or two. I know this is going to sound weird, but how lucky we are that this whole COVID-19 thing happened when it did. Because if this had happened just 10 years ago, I think society as a whole would have collapsed. Because just 10 years ago, there wasn't really the infrastructure in place to cope with shifting from a sort of social model where everybody goes out to get things to a model where everybody stays at home and has things delivered. Amazon didn't actually start ramping up its delivery service until 2013. And they were pretty much leading the way. Back in 2010, it wasn't until the end of 2010 that Netflix started offering its streaming service to anywhere outside of the USA. And in fact, it was only 3 years earlier, in 2007, that Netflix started moving from what had been its core business of delivering rental DVDs by post to switching to an online streaming service. Netflix didn't start streaming even in Europe until 2012. Supermarkets here in the UK had been offering online shopping and delivery as early as 1997, but, well, broadband was virtually unknown in the UK at that time. And so Tesco, for example, the first supermarket to start offering the service, used to ship out CD-ROMs to customers who were interested in online shopping. So you would actually be doing offline shopping, and you would only connect to the internet to upload your order form. By around about 2015, most of the large supermarkets in the UK had online shopping and delivery services, but still the vast bulk of their trade was done in person in the stores. But because they had the basic infrastructure in place by 2015-ish, if they needed to ramp up operations significantly, like for example because everybody was forced to stay indoors and was ordering their shopping online, it was a relatively simple matter. They could ramp up operations quickly by simply hiring more drivers and buying more delivery vans. But that was only because by the mid-2010s they already had the infrastructure in place for online shopping. If this had happened any earlier than that, the supermarkets wouldn't have been able to cope. YouTube was starting to take off by 2010, but it only came out of beta in 2005. And it didn't launch its partner program until 2007, so nobody was actually able to earn any money by making YouTube videos until that time. When YouTube came out of beta in December 2005, it was serving just a little bit more than 2 million video views a day. Just to put that into context for you, in the last 28 days, my channel alone got 2.9 million video views, or 50% more in 28 days than YouTube was getting per day in 2005. just to give you some idea of how quickly YouTube has grown in such a short period of time. But 10 years ago, there was very little actually there. So YouTube was embryonic. Netflix didn't exist anywhere other than the USA. Amazon had only just recently shifted from delivering books to opening up its storefronts to include other goods, but still didn't have much of a market footprint, although it was busy ramping up its operations and would increase the size of its operation like 100-fold over the course of the 10 years between 2010 and 2020. Most large supermarkets did have online delivery services, but they didn't really have the infrastructure to support, at most, more than 30% of their customer base. If this pandemic had happened 10 years ago, we would be screwed. The infrastructure just would not have been in place for us to be able to adapt and be able to retain at least some semblance of normalcy. I mean, saying that civilization as we know it would have collapsed is probably overstating it a little, but people wouldn't be getting into their cars to drive down to the supermarket once every 2 weeks to get some bulk shopping in. Instead, we'd very probably all be living under a state of national emergency and heading to municipal food banks established and overseen by the army in order to collect our weekly rations. So yeah, the whole thing got me thinking, and just looking back, just as little as 10 years ago, at how society's infrastructure could have handled something like this COVID-19 pandemic. And it probably could have handled it, but only just, and it would have been far from pleasant. Everybody's lives would have changed far more than simply not being able to go to the pub on a weekend and having to work from home. I mean, working from home would have been impractical for most people, because the internet infrastructure just wasn't really there to support it. I mean, broadband wasn't even a thing in the UK until 1996, 1997, before it really started kicking off. Businesses that rely on people coming to them, restaurants for example, they've been hit hard, but a lot of them have managed to survive by transitioning to a delivery business model. There's one steakhouse, for example, not too far away, that I used to love going to. Their food was fantastic, but they wouldn't have even dreamed of offering a delivery or a takeaway service until this happened. And if this had happened 10 years ago, before the infrastructure existed to support online food delivery services like JustEat.com here in the UK, or Uber Eats and things like that, these businesses would have gone under. I mean, a lot of them have, but they all would have if this had happened just 10 years earlier. But things are starting to look up. The vaccines are starting to roll out. The issue is that even if you've been vaccinated, you still have to socially distance. Oh, God. You know, I try to stay upbeat for you guys, because you've probably got enough shit in your lives without me adding to it. And for a lot of you guys out there, because I read your emails and the comments that you leave in my videos, I am a source of entertainment that helps you take your mind off the shit that we're all going through. But it gets hard. It really does. And to be completely fair, the whole process of making videos to push out on YouTube and float plane every day, it has really been helping to keep me going, because I do enjoy doing it, and it is keeping me occupied and helping me to take my mind off things, hopefully as much as it's helping you to take your mind off things. It's just that lately, over the last couple of weeks, now that we're into technically the third year of COVID-19, because that's why it's called COVID-19, it started in 2019 and we're now in 2021, man, it's been getting hard. I'm really, really getting sick of it. Struggling to find new things to do. But then again, because this whole thing happened when it did, and not 10 years ago, it has been a lot easier than it would have been to find new things to do. For example, last year I had the kitchen rebuilt, and that allowed me to actually start experimenting with cooking. I mean, prior to 2020, I pretty much just ate stuff out of packets. I mean, technically you could call it cooking, but all I did was open the packet, stick it in the oven for the length of time specified, and then, eat it. But since having the kitchen rebuilt, I haven't eaten anything that came out of a packet pre-prepared. I've ordered food a few times, but most days I cook stuff from fresh. Now, obviously, this is a lot better for you, and it also tastes way better, assuming you cook it properly. But, again, learning how to cook stuff properly 10 years ago, if I had to, and I couldn't leave the house to go to a bookstore in order to buy some cookery books, or somebody who knew how to cook stuff couldn't come round to show me. Learning how to cook would have been very, very difficult. Remember, 10 years ago, YouTube was only getting just over 2 million views a day, which is nothing. Remember, to put that into perspective for you, my channel gets 100,000 views a day. 10 years ago, YouTube was in its infancy. There were no cooking shows I could stream on Netflix because Netflix didn't even arrive in Europe until 2012, I think. I can't remember, but certainly not in 2010. With YouTube being in its infancy, there were no cooking channels. There was nobody putting up videos showing you how to cook anything that you might have been interested in learning how to cook. You would have basically had to teach yourself. And even if you didn't need anybody to teach you how to cook, even if you were an accomplished cook yourself, how are you going to get the ingredients 10 years ago? With everything shut down, supermarkets being unable to cope with the online shopping demand, Amazon not having the infrastructure that it does today, having only recently transitioned from a business model that pretty much consisted of delivering books by mail, things would have been extremely different. In fact, I often think that if COVID-19 had happened in 2010, most of Western civilization would resemble New Orleans in the weeks following Hurricane Katrina. I really think it would have been that bad. So I realise how crazy it sounds to say how lucky we are that COVID-19 happened when it did. I mean, things still really, really suck. I am going crazy with cabin fever here, but learning how to do something new in order to keep you occupied and take your mind off things and stay productive, and being able to get the supplies and materials that you might require to do something new that takes your interest is really just one mouse click away. And that is not what would have been the case even as little as 10 years ago. Actually, while we're on the subject of YouTube statistics, this is not something that I actually do very often, which may come as a surprise to most of you, but I don't really look at my YouTube analytics very often. A couple of weeks ago, though, I did. And I was very surprised, and it's almost certainly due to COVID-19 and the Christmas break, but my YouTube channel's watch time was up by 47%. So the number of minutes in any given month that people spend watching my videos on YouTube was up by 47%. And my overall views were up by 32%. And these are huge numbers. What it means is that more people, 32% more people are choosing to watch my videos. And of those people who are watching my videos, they're watching more of the videos for longer. So, I mean, this is great news, yeah? I must be rolling in the cash. Well, you'd think so. Sadly not, because over the exact same time period, my revenue was up by 2%. Now, how is that possible? Somebody's making an awful lot of money off my YouTube videos, and it's definitely not me. Probably YouTube. But do you remember, well, not last week, because there was no Mingles with Jingles last week, but 2 weeks before that, I asked, has anybody noticed that there are suddenly a lot more adverts on YouTube videos, unless you're running YouTube Premium? And that does seem to be the case, at least according to the responses in Mingles with Jingles 2 weeks ago. People are noticing a lot more in the way of advertising. An unskippable pre-video ad, followed by a skippable video ad, multiple mid-roll ads, and then more ads at the end of the video. Suspiciously, a lot of these adverts appear to be adverts for YouTube Premium. So, yeah. And I'm fairly sure, obviously I don't have any numbers to back this up, but I'm fairly sure that the reason for this massive increase in my watch time and views is because I don't run mid-roll ads. If you're watching one of my videos and an advert pops up in the middle, That's nothing to do with me. I've got those turned off by default. YouTube introduced mid-roll ads and turned them on by default without bothering to ask permission. I think about 6 months ago, possibly longer. And it was extremely annoying. I don't know about you, but when I'm browsing videos on YouTube, I have no objection to having to watch an advert at the start. That's fine. And if they want to run adverts at the end, that's fine. But having the video interrupted by an ad break every 3 to 4 minutes really pisses me off. So much so that I have stopped watching some of my favourite YouTube channels purely and simply because of the sheer number of adverts that get run throughout the course of the video. And that's exactly why I disabled mid-roll ads on my own YouTube channel, because it's really annoying. And I think, again, I have no numbers to support this, but it's my feeling that because I'm one of the channels that refuses to allow mid-roll ads to be run, I'm seeing a lot more traffic. I'm seeing a lot more people watching the videos. I'm seeing people watch the videos for longer because they're not being annoyed by adverts popping up every 3 or 4 minutes. But because there aren't adverts popping up every 3 or 4 minutes, my revenue's only gone up by 2%. It could be worse. It could have gone down. But, well, yeah. Like I said, it could have been worse. It could have been a lot worse. But I have no intention of turning mid-roll ads on because it's a false economy. I mean, it might seem like if I were to enable mid-roll ads during my videos and to start monetizing Mingles with Jingles, for example, because this video should be 100% ad-free, although YouTube did recently change their terms of service to give themselves permission, even though they'd been doing it for years anyway, but they have now officially given themselves permission to run ads on demonetized videos anyway. So if you are seeing adverts on Mingles with Jingles, I apologise, it's YouTube's fault. But if I were to turn mid-roll ads on to make a fast buck in the short term, I have no doubt that it would drive people away. For exactly the same reasons that I had stopped watching some of my favourite YouTube channels, because of the sheer number and annoyance of all of those mid-roll ads. Unfortunately, I'd like to say that I remained strong and refused to buckle under the pressure of all of these adverts that suddenly started flooding all of the favourite channels that I like to watch. Unfortunately, that is not the case. I did bow to the inevitable, and I've signed up for the YouTube Premium service. I mean, I suppose I could have just used an ad blocker. And I'm also fairly sure, again, I have no numbers whatsoever to support this, but given the sheer volume of ads that YouTube is pushing recently, I am very sure that this has caused a massive upsurge in the number of people watching YouTube with an ad blocker. And don't get me wrong, I'm not criticising. I absolutely understand. I mean, it's the sheer volume of ads that YouTube have been running over the course of the last 2 or 3 months that's forced me to basically break and sign up for YouTube Premium. Although in a lucky coincidence, because I recently got a new Samsung phone, I treated myself for Christmas, I got the first 4 months for free. So I didn't even realise that was a thing, but apparently it is. But rather than using an ad blocker, I've signed up for YouTube Premium. I'm not proud of it, I'm not particularly happy about it, but I was just so sick and tired of watching all of the adverts, and I didn't get an ad blocker because I'm kind of old-fashioned in that, well, I was never the guy who would buy or download a pirated computer game or a pirated copy of a TV show or movie. I always bought my stuff. Now, I don't know if that makes me stupid, but I believe that if people have created something, they deserve to be paid for it. So I would buy stuff, and if I couldn't afford to buy it, I wouldn't get it until I could afford to buy it. And for the same reason, I don't run ad blockers. But I do enjoy watching YouTube. Well, there's no probably about it. It is my #1 source of entertainment. I spend more time watching videos on YouTube than I do on Netflix and Amazon Prime combined. And so I felt that it was only fair for me to sign up for YouTube Premium. Either that or continue watching with adverts, and I wasn't going to continue watching with adverts. Nevertheless, if you are watching with an ad blocker, I totally get it. There are going to be people out there who simply can't afford to sign up for YouTube Premium, or who simply refuse to bow to YouTube's pressure and sign up for YouTube Premium. If you fall into the latter category, congratulations, you're made of sterner stuff than me. If you fall into the former category, my commiserations. But either way, I completely understand why you'd be watching YouTube with an ad blocker. And if I couldn't afford YouTube Premium, I'd be watching YouTube with an ad blocker too. Because seriously, fuck those guys. Wow, this episode of Mingles but Jingles got very serious very quickly, didn't it? Yeah, sorry about that. But I am in a bit of a slump lately, but I'm sure I'll bounce back. Anyway, I don't want to end this episode of Mingles with Jingles on a bummer, so I'd like to answer at least one question this week. And this one comes from Paid Too Much for Pilot's License, great name by the way, courtesy of the Salt Mines Discord server, and he wanted to know, Jingles, what's your favourite naval phrase? Either an actual naval term, or a very creative curse word that you only heard in the Navy. One of the favourite expressions that I have ever heard in the Navy is the term, it's cold enough to freeze the balls off a brass monkey, which is an amazingly colourful expression in and of itself, but it's even better when you learn where it actually comes from. To find the source of this expression, you have to go back to the days of sail, when ships were made of wood and men were made of steel, and not the other way round. A brass monkey was the name for a metal plate made of brass with a bunch of indentations in it used for holding iron cannonballs. It would be screwed to the deck of a ship right next to the embrasure where the muzzle loading cannons were fitted. So if you've ever seen a picture of a warship where next to the cannon there's a sort of pyramid of iron cannonballs, those cannonballs were placed in this brass plate on the deck that was called a brass monkey. The thing is, when metals get cold, they contract. When metals get hot, they expand. But they expand or contract at different rates depending on what kind of metal they are. So the brass monkey, because it was made out of brass, when it was cold, it would contract faster than the iron cannonballs that were mounted in it. Which meant that before too long, if it got cold enough, the cannonballs would pop out of the brass monkey, because the cannonballs weren't contracting as fast as the brass monkey was. So it was literally cold enough to freeze the balls off a brass monkey, and that's where that expression comes from. But that's not the favourite expression that I heard in the Navy. The favourite expression was one that I actually made up myself, but nobody believes me. So, allow me to explain. There's another popular expression, more time off than the skipper's eights. Now, I'm going to have to explain this one in the same way that I had to explain cold enough to freeze the balls off the brass monkey. Your eights, or your number 8 uniform, it's your working dress, your blue cotton shirt and trousers. It's treated with fire retardant chemicals, and it's part of what's known as your action working dress. And basically, most people on board the ship will wear this every day, except for the skipper or the captain. The only time you ever see the captain in his number 8 uniform is when shit got serious and you're being shot at, right? The skipper never wears his 8s. Everybody else does, but not the skipper. Hence the expression, more time off than the skipper's 8s, to describe somebody who has an easy job and basically does nothing. And it's a great expression, but I thought I could come up with one better. And, I can't remember when this would have been. It would have been in the first half of the 1990s when I was serving on board Plymouth-based frigates. I came up with a new expression, and it caught on, because years later when I was serving on Portsmouth-based destroyers, I heard somebody use this expression, and I was delighted, because I was the one that came up with it years earlier in Plymouth, but nobody ever believed me. So first I'm going to have to lay the background, and then I'll tell you the expression, so that you'll get it when I tell you it, without me having to explain it afterwards. So, who's heard of the famous pirate Long John Silver? I'm pretty sure most people have heard the name, even if they don't know that he comes from the novel Treasure Island, written by the Scottish author Robert Louis Stevenson. So, Long John Silver, famous fictional pirate, parrot on one shoulder, and he only had one leg. One of his legs, I don't know if it was his port leg or his starboard leg, but one of them was just a wooden peg. Right. Next, steaming bats. Steaming bats are the naval term for your boots, rubber, DMS. The DMS standing for direct molded sole. Again, this is part of your action working dress. They're a sort of rubber treated leather steel toe-capped boots that everybody wears. Even the captain. Even if he's not in his number 8s, he's usually wearing his steaming boots. Often shortened to steaming bats. I don't know why, just because of Navy reasons. So, Long John Silver, steaming bats. And I came up with the expression, more time off than Long John Silver's starboard steaming bat, which I think rolls off the tongue in a delightful way and is way better than more time off than the skipper's 8s. And apparently a few members of the Royal Navy agreed with me, because they started using it, even if not one of them ever believed that I was the original source of the expression, way back in the early 90s when I was serving on Plymouth-based frigates. And on that slightly more upbeat tone, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you've all had a great weekend, and as always, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.